千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together.
Okay, here we are at 22. Yield and remain whole. Bend and remain straight. Be low and become filled. Be worn out and become renewed. Have little and receive. Have much and be confused. Therefore, the sages hold to the one as an example for the world, without flaunting themselves, and so are seen clearly, without presuming themselves, and so are distinguished, without praising themselves, and so have merit, without boasting about themselves, and so are lasting. Because they do not contend, the world cannot contend with them. What the ancients called the one who yields and remains whole, were they speaking empty words? Sincerity becoming whole and returning to oneself. So overall, with this chapter, I think the beginning part and the middle part are pretty easy to parse and understand the meaning. When we get to the end, we get to some lines that require more explanation to figure out exactly as to what it means. So for now, though, let's see if we can isolate the individual sections. First, I want to point out that we do have a repeating character. Indeed, we have a repeating structure from 1 all the way down to 6. So I think everyone can see that. You can see the red, the highlighted character in red in the middle of each line, going way down from 1 down to 6. So this is a pretty good clue that we have a section there from 1 to 6. Okay, then, so what's below? Well, following 1 to 6, we have 2 lines. Therefore, the sages hold to the one as an example for the world. That can be seen as a conclusion, a mini conclusion for 1 to 6. Or it can also be seen as a mini intro for the following lines. Either way, there's no right or wrong in this particular case. It actually works well in both. All right, so looking further down, what other repeating patterns can we possibly spot? Well, let's take a look at lines 9 all the way down to line 12, 9 to 12. Lines 9 to 12, you've got the first 2 characters repeating in those 4 lines. So you may be wondering what those characters correspond to. We'll break down the first one in detail, but just to let everyone know, the first character there, the first character of line 9, 10, 11, and 12, that's the character for no or not. The second character right after that is the character for self. So the first two characters, not and self, are not meant to be one thing, one expression. It needs the rest of the line to make sense. In the English, you'll see the no or the not translated as without. That's the first word. And the character for self, the second character, is translated as themselves. So you'll see themselves repeated in the translation for 9, 10, 11, and 12. Now, those two characters are not the only repeating characters from 9 to 12. There is another one. Can everyone see it? There's also the fourth character that is a repeating character. So it is now highlighted, so you can see the repeating patterns up and down from 9 down to 12. That character is thus, so, therefore. In this particular case, I've translated them as so, and you can see it in the English translation here. Those are also repeated. So this pretty much tells us that we can also group these lines together as a section. And now we have this classical structure of the Tao Te Ching chapters applied to this chapter as well. Well, we have a beginning section that serves as the chapter intro. We have the middle section, that's the meat of the chapter, so to speak, the main part of the chapter. Then we have the last section, which is the concluding section. Kind of a classical, often repeated structure throughout the entire Tao Te Ching. And not something that I see anyone else talking about. So having gone through the sections, beginning, middle, and the end, we're now ready to break it down line by line. So as I mentioned, when we began talking about this, we'll look at the characters. We'll look at the characters in detail. But first, starting with lines 1 and 2, we've got the two lines, yield and remain whole, bend and remain straight. So I want to talk about them together because they're closely related together. So when you look at the Chinese characters and the English translation, you can pretty much map the first character in each line to the first word in English. So the first character there is yield. And this is an ancient usage. It's not used that way in modern Mandarin. And then the second character, the first character of the second line is the first word of the second translation line, and that's bend. In a similar way, the last character of line 1 is mapping to whole, the last word in English, and the last character of line 2 maps to straight. Both whole and straight, these two characters are widely used, still being used in modern Mandarin. So it's the beginning part that's kind of ancient classical Chinese usage, but the last characters are very often seen in modern Mandarin. So let's talk about the meaning behind yielding and bending. They actually point to the same thing. To yield and to bend are two ways of describing a flexible approach. So there is a lot about the Tao that's emphasizing the soft. The soft, the pliant, the flexible is superior to the tough, the brittle, the unyielding, unchanging, because dead things are stiff. Dead things cannot bend. Dead things become brittle. So to be fully alive, it is important to understand the virtue of yielding and bending. two ways of describing the flexible approach. Here, specifically, it's all about living life with a soft and flexible approach. And the reason is, it's unwise to meet force with force, to counter violence with violence. Usually, not a very good idea. That's not the strategy of the Tao. What is the strategy of the Tao? Well, we know it's never about head-on collision. Rather, it is about stepping out of the way of an incoming attack. Deflect, channel, or guide the force, that incoming force, to let the opponents be overextended and unbalanced. That's the Tao. So it has more in terms of similarity, it has more in common with judo, with jujitsu, etc. Less in common with breaking bricks, breaking boards, with karate, taekwondo, etc. So it's not about striking, it's about redirecting. So that's the first two lines. I think we can do probably another slide or two, and then we're going to need to jump to the conclusion, to the summary, which is going to be a summary of 21. We had a previous summary, and this time we do sort of the concluding summary of 21. But let's do another slide of 22. So I like to focus on line 3. Be low and become filled. So being soft, being pliant, being flexible, that's one strategy of the Tao, no doubt about that. It's not the only one. In addition to flexibility or a soft approach, Lao Tzu also brings up the importance of the humble approach. So humble approach, you can think of it as the principle of softness applied to perhaps the mind or the ego. So take a look at this particular line that says be low and become filled. In this particular context, low, in this case, refers to the level of one's preconceived notions. If you have a lot of preconceived notions, you are not low, you are filled up pretty high. And if you are full of preconceived notions, there's no room in your mind for learning anything new. If you have a low level, if you have no preconceived notions or very few, then there's hope because there's room for you to learn new things, just as there's room in an empty cup to receive fresh hot tea. So if you don't have a lot, then there's room in your mind to be filled with new and possibly useful information. Now, of course, not all information that we learn become useful. And sometimes new information that come in would just contribute more toward temptation, distraction than anything else. But if we don't have an open mind, if we're not receptive to new information, then they don't even have a chance to come in the first place. And we end up learning absolutely nothing. So it's important to approach with the humble mindset, the humble approach, so that there is the possibility of something new coming in, so that we can look at it, process it, understand it, possibly make use of it. All right, so pretty much as expected, we are approaching the end of our time together today. So I do want to jump ahead to the summary. As I mentioned, the summary that I've prepared for today is focusing on the end of 21, Tao Te Ching 21. So the top part of the summary you have already seen from last time. It's focusing on the one, which maps to the very last line of chapter 21, when Lao Tzu says, how do I know the nature of the source? With this. This is the one. And the most important question, if you recall, when we got to the end of that discussion, was the question about the one thing for you in life. What's the one thing for you? What makes you jump off your haystack in the morning? Have you found it? If you have not found it, then the question then becomes, how will you explore and examine your life in order to figure out what it is? So, what is the quest for the one thing for you? So that's the overall strategic level about the meaning, the purpose of your life. Now, let me talk about daily practice. When we talk about the one thing, I want to reiterate the importance of daily practice, especially with the stuff that we talked about today in regards to the one thing. It would be wonderful, it will be phenomenal if everyone can start using this chapter in a practical way by applying it to everyday life. So here's what I mean specifically. Suggestion number one, starting with develop the mental habit to pare down everything. Apply the 80-20 principle everywhere. So no matter what you're faced with, no matter what you see, it could be at work, it could be at home, it could be a hobby that you are involved in, whatever it may be. I want to encourage you to start cultivating the habit to practice the 80-20 principle. Number one. Number two, I want to ask you to remember the concept of recursion. So in programming, the concept of recursion means you apply the same algorithm to a set of data, and then the result of that, you apply the algorithm again. And you do that repeatedly until you get to the one. So do the Pareto recursively at least once. Once gets you from 10 to 2, from 100 down to 20. Repeat as necessary to get you to the one. And usually 2 iterations, 2 recursions will be enough to get to the one, the important thing. Lastly, I would like you to keep in mind that when you do this, you are not actually neglecting the other things that are also important. You are simply, think of yourself as simply setting yourself up to resolve other important things one at a time, sequentially, but with you possessing increasing power. So when you finally come around to resolving one particular issue, you're going to be more confident, more powerful, more effective than you were before. So start with that one thing and see how far it takes you. So I hope that this summary, the first 2 bullet points you've seen last time, but I hope they make more sense this time after our discussion of the one thing. And then 1, 2, 3 are practical steps that I hope will benefit you as you practice the one thing.
Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.